Good afternoon and welcome to Armexa's webinar on what risks have you accepted in a company acquisition, presented by Jacob Marzloff, our CEO. We're going to take us through this webinar about truly what a company acquisition and what it means to cyber, and we'll have some parallels on what it means to safety too. And Jacob's going to take us through a presentation that he's done, and it kind of reached out and touched a lot of our end user community and had a lot of questions when he did this presentation. So we wanted to do this in a webinar for the team. So first, let's go to the next slide, and we'll have a quick introduction by Jacob, introducing himself. Hello, Jacob. Thanks for joining it.
Hey, Dave. Yeah, no, thank you. So yes, everybody, Jacob Marzloff, I'm the CEO and co-founder here. For those who I have not met before, very quick background about myself. I started off in industry working in oil and gas, managed the infrastructure and security at a lot of facilities there. Went over to Accenture, worked in the big consulting for a while before starting up Armexa to be purely focused on industrial cyber risk management. And so building up a team, finding all the smart people around me, and getting surrounded by the best in the industry. So that's the goal.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today. A little bit background on Armexa. You know, we're built from the plant floor up. Jacob said it when he did his introduction. All of us come from an end user background, a big four consulting background, and boutique consulting background. So I don't want to say we're like farmers, but we have seen a thing or two, and we like to share that information with our team. We're focused on OT. It doesn't mean we don't do IT. It doesn't mean IT's out of scope. What it means is we focus on that interface between IT and OT, and at times we get involved with some IT applications and things like that, particularly billing and looking at the risk of things like that, and other OT IT interfaces. And our approaches on almost everything we have can work in IT. It works at the enterprise scale. Sometimes it's a small scope, sometimes it's a large scope, but we adjust our approach and make sure that we meet the needs of the clients. 30 plus people. We've been in business since 2021. You can see the slide down the bottom. It has the countries we've worked in and many, many engagements across the globe. So let's move on to the next slide.
Oh yeah, no, I can go ahead and kick off. So yeah, for those that are listening in, if I sound a little under the weather, that's because that's the consequence of having a 10-month-old in daycare, which, that sucks. But you know what else sucks? Acquisitions suck. So I know that's been the story of my career. Like I mentioned, I started off in oil and gas, which is very M&A heavy, right? And so my job then was maintaining that infrastructure, deploying security, going out to the field, working with operations, that kind of thing. But then every once in a while, I would go out and deploy something, get it all configured, and then find out that, oh, wait, we're selling all these assets. I need to go rip everything out that I just deployed. Or on the other side of things, I would be working and then find out just when the public did that we had acquired a ton of new assets all over the place. So now I need to go out, and that shifts all my priorities. And I always felt like I was finding out last. Since then, I've worked across a lot of different industries with a lot of different companies and different people. But I've heard something very similar, no matter what the company is, and it comes down to M&A. I hear the exact same questions that I had, right? Which is, why am I finding out about this now? Does anybody actually care about security? And probably most importantly, where's my budget? So before really getting into the details of budget, I'd like to take a second to talk about the personas that are in the room for M&A, specifically the deal team. Now, it's probably easy and maybe fun to consider it as just a bunch of people wearing very fancy suits, sitting around a nice giant mahogany table on the top floor of some skyscraper somewhere. And that may be kind of true, but I find it to be more accurate and a lot more fun to think of what they really are, right? These deal teams are professional gamblers of the highest order. Right? The stakes that they're dealing with, the money, the size of these deals, I mean, it's just giant, right? Sometimes I think we take it for granted. We're able to throw around numbers like millions and billions, and, you kind of get numb to it. But if you think about it, I mean, the difference between 1 million and 1 billion is about 1 billion, right? So these guys are dealing with a gigantic amount of money and a gigantic amount of stress. And really what's important to remember is that their job's not to eliminate risk at all, right? It's to accept the exact right amount of risk required to maximize the reward. So it's not that they're ignoring 50-page technical audits whenever we go in front of them and show them that security issues are there. It's that, a list of unpatched HMIs is just a rounding error whenever we talk about the size of these deals. We're speaking the wrong language. Now, to get the budget that you need, there's sort of 3 truths that are a little uncomfortable that I might need to accept about the game that we're playing here. The first is your role. So a deal team is going to look at all the years of your OT security expertise the exact same way that a carpenter looks at a screwdriver. Carpenter doesn't need a 20-minute lecture on the metallurgy of a screwdriver. All they need to know is the screw tight? Are these cabinets going to fall off the wall? Like, what's really going to happen here? The second is the deal itself. So it's natural for us as OT professionals to see things as critical findings, and we deal with critical all the time, right? It's natural to think that, hey, this should have at least slowed down the deal, maybe knocked a few dollars off the price of the deal because of how many security vulnerabilities there are at this new facility. Sort of like a home inspection, right? If you're like me, I've always lived in a swamp, basically, whether it's in Louisiana or Houston. And so whenever I'm buying a house, I really want my home inspector to tell me, are there cracks in the foundation? That is a deal killer for me. Unfortunately, reality here is that OT security issues are not going to be a crack in the foundation. That's more like, finding out that a light bulb isn't working in a closet. That's just the size and the scope of these deals. And finally is the data itself. CEOs, deal teams, boards, all those folks, they don't really know what a lack of IT/OT network segmentation means. Not like anyone that's listening to this does. We're supposed to know those details. What they do know, though, is what a single point of failure that can shut in my entire facility means, right? So once you accept these truths, you can start being frustrated about no one listening and start figuring out why they're not listening. So why does no one care? Well, to illustrate this, I was actually talking to the Landman of the Year 2022 not too long ago. So on top of being a stellar landman and putting Billy Bob Thornton to shame, he also advises on large deals. He runs deal teams, and he was telling me that a few years back, he led a 40-person team on an $11 billion acquisition on behalf of a giant oil company. Now, they had 90 days to advise on whether or not this company should make an $11 billion bet. So just bear with me. Let's do some quick math there. $11 billion over 90 days. That means that on average, that deal team was advising on over $100 million of deal value every single day. Now, I don't know how many people here have, priced out an OT security remediation project or a program or things like that. But even if you haven't, you probably know in your heart of hearts that $100 million goes a very long way when it comes to security. You could gold plate everything with that kind of budget. So because of that, it's kind of hard to justify going in and saying that, hey, we need to think about the OT security budget when it's a percentage of 1 day worth of deal value that they advise on. Now, looking at how much they have to do in what short time frame there, right? We've all been on a lot of projects. Everybody, worked on teams before. So imagine 90 days. You're meeting 40 people for the first time. You walk in, like, hi, I'm Jacob. Hi, I'm Jacob. And do that 40 times. And then 90 days later, we're all coming to a consensus to say, yay, nay, bet $11 billion. There is a ton of activity that's going on. And so no wonder whenever we try to go into these conversations and say, oh my God, there's security vulnerabilities, they might look at us a little cross-eyed, right? They're not going to slow down for something that they don't really understand and they don't see as impactful. And finally, on the budget itself, remediation budgets are rarely going to be allocated before the deal closes. I think there's room for that one day, and I hope we get there as an industry. But in reality, the deal team's already moving on, right? They need to go to make the next big bet. They need to go to the casino, right? So they are not going to allocate that budget ahead of time. And that's exactly why you need to have a strategy ready for day one before the next deal happens at your company. So what do you do with all that? Well, first off, stop guessing what matters to your company. Go out and find your corporate risk matrix. This is essentially the table game that we're playing inside the casino. Right? So this is the table where all the bets are made. Now, what I have here is an example that came out of the 62443-3-2 standard, but there's a lot of these out there, and more than likely your company already has one. If you haven't seen it before, it lives in different areas. It kind of depends on the organization, on who owns the risk matrix, but it could be, safety, legal, operations, finance. It really just depends on the organization. But the important point with this is that someone, probably a lot of people, have spent time deciding what is and is not important to your business. So I'll kind of do a very quick overview of how this works. It's not a very complex table, but on the left, on the y-axis there, we have our likelihood. How often is something potentially going to happen? And across the top on our x-axis, we have our consequences. What is the worst case scenario if it does happen? I have only financial on the top here, and that's honestly just because, the text would be too small if I added all the other consequences there. So typically there's other dimensions that do matter to an organization, things like operational consequences, safety, environmental, reputational. Reputational is kind of an interesting one, especially after the new SEC rules a couple of years back. A lot of companies don't want to be in the news for having a cyber incident anymore. It actually has a material effect on stock price. So sometimes reputation can matter more than these other things. But again, the important point is you don't need to guess what's important. And what's important to us as security professionals might be on a different scale compared to what the business finds to be important. So it's important to go find this and understand it so that you can see where the bets need to be placed. Now, great. We have the table game that we're going to be playing this game on. Now we need to develop our chips. So need to move fast. Remember, it's a deal that's closing. The budget dollars are going to dry up kind of quickly, right? So ahead of the next deal that closes, you need to pick a speedy methodology for quickly assessing risk at the site so that you can see which bets need to be placed. Here, what we do is a more streamlined version of our cyber bow tie methodology. But honestly, any methodology that's aligned to that 3-2 standard will work fine. But I'm going to talk about cyber bow tie because that's what we do. So for those that haven't seen this before, I'll just quickly walk through. On the left, we have our threats. These could be internal threats, external, malicious actors. It could be unintentional consequences, misconfigurations, things like that. It's stuff that's hammering the system all the time. In the middle, we have our top event, right? That could be a loss of control, loss of availability, loss of view, things like that. And on the far right, we have our operational consequences. Site could shut in, you could have an environmental spill, things like that. So what we do during an M&A process, instead of going through the entire bow tie with all the different scenarios, pick the worst case. What does the worst day look like at this new site that's being acquired? Is it a shut-in? Is it a spill? Things like that, and what could cause that? In this case, we're going to talk about loss of control. Now, if we focus on the left, we have our threats coming in, but typically, more than likely, you have a lot of barriers that are in place to prevent those threats from initiating that top event. These are things like your firewall, hardening, patching programs, things like that, remote access. What you need to do ahead of the next M&A is take an inventory. What controls do you have in place in your existing infrastructure? You should already know what's there, right? You might have a bunch of firewalls. You might have the best secure remote access solution in the world, whatever. You know what's important to you. You know what matters. List those out and then also know how to rank if they're effective. Example here is always the classic. We've all seen a firewall that's out there. The lights are blinking. It looks like it's working. And then you crack open the config and it's got a big old any rule. And it's basically a very expensive router. So that's not as effective as other controls, right? So you want to be able to pick the controls that matter to you, that are in your environment today, and rank how effective they are. So you can go see, do these controls exist at the new facility that's being acquired? Great. Now let's look at the left side. So let's assume that those barriers are not in place. Let's assume that loss of control event happens. What is the worst case scenario that could happen then? Ideally, you're going to have a lot of mitigations in place. These are your mitigative barriers. So that's things like technical controls, could be backup and recovery, that I'm sure is tested perfectly because everyone does that all the time. But your backups, but it could also be things more like policies, right? So your disaster recovery plan, are people trained on incident response? Do they know who to call? Do they know what to look out for? You should also take credit for mechanical safeguards here. It's important to be very realistic in this scenario, because we're going into an environment asking for budget and talking about things to people that don't really know cyber, but they know what operational consequences are. Typically, facilities are engineered in a way that, hey, these worst case operational consequences should have been accounted for, and there may be some fail safes that are already there. Take those into account. Be realistic. Something bad could still happen, but you don't want to ignore something just for the sake of security, right? So this is how we were able to move fast without sacrificing rigor whenever an M&A happens. So we've got our table game. That's the risk matrix. This is how we develop our chips so that we can place them on the board. Well, how do we place our bets? This is where we translate our technical findings, which are on the left, to something the business actually cares about, which is on the right. So I'm going to pick on a few of these in just a second. All right. So I'm going to pick on a couple of these findings. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to give you a sense of how these get placed. So let's take a look at network segmentation, number one there. For us as professionals, we know what segmentation is. We know it's a best practice. We know if it's not there, it's a violation of that. There are standards that say that you should do this or that you need to do this. We know how important it is. On this board, when we're placing this bet, we are showing it as unacceptable. It's in the red zone. But why? During that bow tie analysis, what we showed in this new facility, right? Don't fight the scenario here, but what we found in the analysis is that there were effectively a path for segmentation to have a single infection halt production across the entire facility, right? And because of this facility, we know that that's $10 to $25 million of damage. So that's how we're able to rank it on the consequence side. If this happens, it shuts in the facility. That's where you would get our damages from. As far as likelihood, this is something that gets debated quite a bit. You can go back and forth on it. But in this scenario, what we found is that there were effectively zero preventative barriers to prevent this from happening. So we're saying that it has a greater than 50% chance of happening. Now, if we look on the converse, let's take a look at number 7 there, abandoned assets. Again, as professionals, this is an annoying problem. We hate to see ghost assets on the network. It's yet another firmware that you have to keep track of, some new hardware model, a different operating system, something that just needs to go into a spreadsheet. And God, it's aggravating. Here, it's acceptable. That's because in this scenario, what we found is that all these legacy devices, these abandoned assets, they're actually often a guard shack. It's on the fence line of the facility. They're not really connected to the network in a meaningful way. And honestly, if the whole guard shack got bulldozed tomorrow, it wouldn't really make a difference to the facility operations. So it's something we need to keep track of, and it could be a problem. But here, what I'm showing is that it's a minor problem. What I'm signaling to the deal team as an odds maker is that do not spend your capital here yet. Focus on the red first. We'll take care of this other stuff down the road. Doing things in this method really changes the conversation from why haven't you patched these systems and being a security nuisance to, hey guys, are you really willing to bet $25 million on a coin flip here? When the deal team sees things in that red zone, it's hopefully going to change their mind around seeing it as a tech debt rounding error, and they see it for what it actually is, which is a liability that's inconsistent with the deal's objective. We're not asking for budget in this scenario. We're providing the data that is required to protect the deal value that they just purchased. But up until this point, what we've mostly been talking about is translation, right? How do we translate our technical findings into language that these folks care about, and so how we can secure that budget. But now I want to show how we go from complaining about security to helping finance make rational bets. Like we discussed, network segmentation is not a best practice here, right? It's a single point of failure that can shut you down, and you already agreed that its consequence is in the $10 to $25 million range. The only next logical question here is, well, how much money is a reasonable amount to spend to reduce that risk and buy down those odds? Time is moving quickly. Deal teams are moving on. You need to be able to assess this quickly, right? So my rule of thumb here is pretty simple. Just look at this as a fraction of the consequence. And keep in mind, this is not the do everything perfect gold plate budget. This is the stop the bleeding, triage, make sure that it's safe and you're not going to introduce more risk into your environment budget. Now, without a schedule, this is still just complaining. So what we do is typically look at this in a 30, 60, 90-day plan. So days 0 to 30 is triage. That's stopping the bleeding, stabilizing the system, making sure that those most obvious and worst case scenario threats are not able to get in the first place. That's what days 0 through 30 is. So that when we go to days 30 to 60 into remediation, we're not already starting, or we have some confidence that those threats are not going to get into the environment while we're remediating further and buying down more of those odds. So that in days 60 through 90, we can integrate the facility into our existing environment, and we are confident that we're not introducing risk from this new acquisition into our existing environment. Now, I opened up with the idea that M&A is really kind of like a casino floor. Well, on a casino floor, no one's really surprised when the house wins. The whole game and every single part of it is architected in a way that it favors the house. What we're doing through this whole process here is that we are becoming the house. We're not pretending that risk is going away. We're forcing risk into a format that leadership can price and then buy down the worst odds first. When leadership sees things as an unacceptable finding on this matrix, they're not looking at a tech problem. They're looking at a threat to their acquisition's ROI. And just remember, the goal is not to be perfect here. We all want to be perfect. We're all engineers at heart. We love going for the maximum, right? But it's not to be perfect. We're trying to make the bet rational. So define the risk, fund with a fraction of the consequence, shift the odds, and protect your deal value. What do you do with all this? Well, I hope I've made the case that you should not be presenting lists of CVEs up to your leadership anymore, right? A list of CVEs without context is just a boring list, right? We need to be answering so what when it comes to security. So this is a method that you can answer that, well, so what of it all? Go out and find it today if you've never seen it before. Go out and understand your corporate risk matrix. Even if your job has barely anything to do with M&A, even if it's tangentially related, understanding the language of your business is going to do a lot for your career because you'll be able to translate your requirements and your needs into a language that they actually care about in the first place. And then finally, make sure that you're mapping all your findings to the business's definition of severity. We fall into this trap as security professionals a lot of seeing things as critical, and we have to deal with that all the time. Make sure that we are raising the flag at the appropriate time, and we're not, the boy who cried wolf at the end of the day. So if we want the budget to protect these plants, we have to speak the right language. And remember that you're not betting with house money, you are the house. So tip the odds in your favor. Thanks, guys.
Excellent. Thank you, Jacob. So Jonathan Chapman is the man behind the curtains working with us. Do we have any questions in the chat?
Got a couple in here already. The first one is, how do I reach the C-suite audience to make the pitch?
Yeah, so I think the best way that I've seen that is combine with safety, right? We're all working in industrial environments anyways, and in industrial companies. Safety is well understood. Most of these companies already have a solid safety culture, and that's known as important. It's something that you can't ignore. So tying cyber in with safety to then find the right champions, whether it's a safety person that gets upskilled on cyber or vice versa or something in between, that's where we see the most success. So find the people that are already going in there and that they do care about, and then find that correlation between cybersecurity and safety. Dave, did you have anything you wanted to add on that one?
Yeah, I would say that it's kind of like a triad. You spoke to safety is critical for the OT people, but we also have to make sure that we don't forget the IT folks, because that risk matrix you showed on slide 7, OT folks and safety folks think in those terms. IT folks may not have that type of risk layout. So you're really going to have to, identify your champions that you can go to the C-suite and say, look, these are our concerns, but speak from the same deck or the same language when it comes to risk. Is that fair?
Definitely. Yep. It's a combined effort across, and should all be speaking the same language, because that makes it all a lot smoother.
Don't go in as OT by yourself, because they'll say, so what? I think that's the point, right? They'll literally say, so what? Because of Jacob's slide, it showed, $11 billion deal, and it doesn't click the box. So I had a couple other questions here. Do we have another one, Jonathan? Or
there's one more here.
Okay, go ahead.
Are there software tools or platforms that can scan my OT environment and automatically assess my risk?
It's a good question, and that would be a nice silver bullet. There's a combination of efforts there, right? So for fully assessing the risk, it's a combination of technical controls that can be somewhat automated, right? Like a firewall analysis or number of assets, vulnerabilities. That's a pretty well understood problem, and there's a lot of tools out there on the market. Your Nozomis and things like that. But there's also the softer side, right? I say softer side, but less automated. And so that is taking into account your policies, your procedures, your training, taking credit for those things. That does have a measurable impact on reducing your risk if done appropriately. And that's not something that you can connect to via API. So that part still needs to be layered in. So I would say there are tools out there that will purport to be able to do this fully automated. Make sure that if you are using some of those tools, that you layer in or take credit for the more the things that don't have an API. I'll put it that way. Same thing with the mechanical safeguards. Those barriers, those aren't necessarily always going to pop up in some sort of asset inventory. That's more of a conversation with safety, with operations, understanding how these systems fully work and how they were engineered in the first place. Anything to add on to that one, Dave?
No, absolutely. I agree. And, if it is a business that they're acquiring, that's a new business for them, that you don't necessarily understand or don't have the value or have the understanding of what the consequences are, that's a good time to call in a cyber bow tie and pull the safety studies and say, wait a minute, what am I really dealing with here? I mean, there's a big difference between making frozen vegetables and ethylene oxide. And forgive me for that. I know frozen vegetables are good, but I don't want to besmirch them. But the reality is, if you're going into a new business segment, you really need to do your diligent homework on how it's regulated and what the consequences are to add into that pie that Jacob just went through.
And actually, to give it targeted, I just thought while you were talking there, Dave, yeah, there are a few companies that are coming onto the market that are getting better at doing this. And so I saw some of them that had just launched. So if whoever asked that wanted to go into research it. I know, for example, Indirex is one company that's starting to go down this path in a more automated fashion and actually taking into account some of those safety components. So it's a new market for a lot of us. It's not a new idea, but yeah, there's some interesting things that are happening out there. So,
yeah,
anyway.
it's very contextual too, because you may be picking up contracts that have liquidated damages. You just don't know.
Mm-hmm,
You just don't know. So you have to ask some of those questions. And a lot of times some of those tools won't ask those savvy, been through the grinder of risk for 30 plus years kind of questions.
Totally. Yep.
I had a couple of questions here. Have you ever seen a joint cyber and safety M&A checklist? And if so, did that help?
Oh yeah, man, that would be amazing to be able to have that all the time. It's definitely a good tactic to have. The more mature organizations will have done something like that or are starting to move in that direction. But honestly, getting in front of those deal teams and trying to get them to add yet another thing to their docket is tough enough. So yeah, if we're going to have a chance of doing that, layering it in with safety is the right place, because they do look at safety components as part of their due diligence. So adding on a few checklist items there is the best, in my mind, probably the best path to actually make this a reality, to assess the security pre-close.
Yeah, agree. And the other question that was listed was from a regulatory environment. Does a regulatory environment help in making the case for the cyber and safety to be involved earlier rather than later? Meaning, if you're going to a new country, they have their own cyber standards, they have their own kind of safety, they adopt maybe international safety standards, but a lot of them are adopting national safety standards. So the regulatory environment can shift. So having a clear view of that, Jacob, I think would be it would go into the pre-knowledge before you meet with the C-suite deal team, correct?
Oh, for sure. No, we see regulatory bringing a lot more awareness, even if those regulations don't apply to that industry in particular, but it's starting to bubble up even more to these boards and C-suites, and it's something that needs to be considered. Just like there's regulations on the safety side, like you mentioned, the cyber regulations are coming through, and it can and will be a component of M&A. Are we already complying with these regulations, right? It kind of almost feathers in with insurance as well, right?
Yeah.
Hey, are we even able to cover this policy? Going back to the Houston and the home analogies, are these insurance companies going to pull out because there's just too many damages here, right? And there's too much risk with all the hurricanes. Similar thing whenever it comes to industrial and cyber insurance.
Excellent. Jonathan, any other questions?
That is all I see right here.
Okay.
Could give it 20 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great presentation. I've been involved with some of these before, and again, it doesn't move the needle for these guys. They're worried. The folks at that level are worried about so many other things, and they're making decisions that affect a lot of folks' lives when you're doing mergers and acquisitions, and cyber. And is it secure? Is it secure enough? It's way down on the totem pole of things to worry about. Is that fair? I mean, that's what we've talked about from a scope and scale of liability standpoint, and legally, you really got to put it into terms of risk, as Jacob has said.
Exactly. Yep. And just going in there without speaking the right language and the right words. I mean, yeah, good luck. We've all tried it, and it falls on deaf ears at best.
At best, yes.
You don't want to be kicked out of those rooms. And so, yeah, speaking in the right terminology and understanding what's actually important to the business at the end of the day. What are those motivators, right? This is in some ways a very technical problem, but in other ways it's kind of a people problem, right?
Yeah.
And it's how we say it is almost as important as what we find.
Yeah, exactly. Our next webinar is, we haven't scheduled it yet, but this one, the next topic is what, Jonathan? I think it was
the LNG industry.
LNG industry. So be careful. Look for that one coming through social media, and invites going out to everyone. And we hope to see you there. And thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you all.